they've been the ones that have gone out there and knocked on doors and done voter registration, and they've controlled the narrative, and they've done a host of little, I call them shenanigans, but you know, they have weakened our electoral system. When I go out there and I'm registering voters, it's not about politics. It's not a partisan effort. Of course, we lean a certain way, and we hope that people will follow, you know, our views and values. But basically, we want people to vote their values. So by educating and getting people to become informed citizens, you take away people that will get, let's say, wrapped up in catchy slogans like "Hope and Change" and "Yes, we can," and they'll vote for things that matter to them and matter to their family. Engage in citizen-led initiatives. What I've seen so far in Houston, Texas, where they've got the True the Vote initiative, which is basically tackling election integrity across the country, they came up with 80 points that they presented to their state house, and of those 80 points, they were able to get voter ID and a host of other initiatives passed. And of course, next year, they will go back with those same 80 points and see how many they can get passed. So every year, these citizens are taking a step forward and doing what our lawmakers should be doing. Feel confident about working with your Board of Elections, and how to use social media and networking to report these issues. These are some of the things you're going to learn today, and of course, engage in nonpartisan voter registration. This is something I worked on when I was with American Majority, so I don't have the manuals anymore, but this is the presentation that we've been doing across the country. Now, for as long as there have been elections, there have been people out there that have tried to turn them. I always tell people that the very first when I look back, I think of Kennedy and Nixon, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. How many people remember that? Where every damn person in Cook County got a vote. Wow. At the time, let's go just a little bit ahead. At the time, Nixon, of course, the Republican candidate, said that he didn't want to contest the election because who wants to win that way? Back in the 60s, you know, they didn't want a judge to decide the election. It would have gone on for longer than they wanted, so they decided just to let it go. But unfortunately, that set a precedent that other Democrats have followed since then. And of course, there is a daily in the White House right now, too, so it's amazing how everything comes full circle. Democrat candidates realized that most people don't want to win an election by having a judge decide it, so they started to use that to their advantage. It's not all elections that you have voter fraud in. It's usually the very close ones, the ones that really matter. And it's not all across the country. It's certain counties and certain states and certain precincts that are always prone to fraud, especially if you have those precincts that are reporting late all the time. That means that they're waiting for all the other precincts to report so they can see how many votes they need. Or they're the ones that officially, yes, that's something that I have seen when I was working at Acorn. I remember people going around in the state of Maryland telling people to go ahead and get in line because the polls were going to stay open late, and then they went and found a liberal judge that of course allowed the polls to stay open late, and they were able to get more people to come in, get in line, and as long as they were in line, they got to cast a vote. So those polls were reporting 2 to 3 hours behind other precincts that had already turned in their votes. And of course, Bush versus Gore. This was the turning point. This was what really got, I won't keep saying liberals, but some people that are consider themselves progressive, because we don't want to be partisan, really angry. And they decided something had to be done. So what they realized is that it wasn't who cast the votes that matters, it's who counts the votes. And that's where the Secretary of State project came from. How many of you guys have heard of the Secretary of State project?
Ohio.
Yes, Jennifer Brenner.
Right.
Notorious.
Right.
This came out of the 2000 elections because Democrats and other people realized that the Secretary of State was the person that was the go-to. So if they could get a friendly Secretary of State in there, they could really push the election in their favor. So they started doing this across the country. And Help America Vote Act came out of that too. Katherine Harris, this was the kingmaker. She was the decider, had to use that one too. But she was the one that really started this. So that's what you had from the Secretary of State Project, Bruner. Robin Carnahan, I think how you say it, or Carahan, in Missouri, Mark Ritchie in Minnesota. Those were just some of the alums of the Secretary of State project. And it's very interesting that almost all of them have gone on to try to seek higher office. It's because they were rewarded for their, Bruner was settled several lawsuits that were started when Kim Blackwell was Secretary of State, where Acorn was part of that too. And she settled them, and those lawsuits weakened the electoral system. Mark Ritchie, of course, gave us Senator Al Franken. Everyone had a job to do, and once they did that job, it was time to move on to higher office. So just think about that. This all came out of the 2000 elections, as well as the Help America Vote Act. Yes?
Okay, Anita, then what should Catherine Harris have done? I thought, should she have let them continue the recount, or what would the fairest thing to have been done there then?
No, she did her job, but because she did her job, people, the Democrats or some people realized that, they held, the Secretary of State was a very important office that they had been ignoring, and it was time to get in there and put people in that would do their bidding, and that's where that came from.
Right.
So she did exactly what she was supposed to do.
Okay, thank goodness you, because I had the misconception
No, she wasn't
that she
criticizing.
was.
Yeah, as a former liberal, I try to give you how they think and how, the thinking process goes. So to them, 2000 elections, very, very bad. Very, very bad. That and that whole redistricting that came out of it, they're still upset about that as well.
Soros is behind this, right?
I'm sorry?
Isn't Soros behind the Secretary of State project?
Yes.
Yes.
That was his
Tim
brainchild,
Yeah.
and he funded it in several states, and he made
Tim
sure that
Worth.
they had the
Tim
campaign
Worth.
cash that was needed.
Tim Worth of Colorado.
Yeah, there were about 11 of them. You're exactly right. There were 11 across the country in key states, some of them being battleground states, that were in position to where if anything happened in their state, they would be ready to come in and make that decision. I've seen it, we'll come back to it with Franken versus Coleman in a minute. Zombies voted. Now, of course, we've never seen anyone rise from the dead on election day. Everyone will tell you that it's a joke and that, there's no such thing as voter registration fraud. But when you have people that have been deceased for a number of years and their names keep turning up on the voter rolls, there is a distinct chance that they can cast a ballot. This has happened most recently in New York, where the Acorn affiliate Working Families Party, they were I don't want to say indicted, they were investigated for corruption charges, and several fraudulent absentee ballots were traced back to them where the people had died at least 2 to 3 cycles before, but they had been consistently casting votes.
Yeah.
Deceased voters' names are not properly throughout?
No. And we'll talk about that when we get to the Help America Vote Act too. Franken versus Coleman. This is where we really got to see the Secretary of State project apples. This is where people started to really realize what Acorn and some of these other groups were doing when they registered Mickey Mouse in the starting lineup of the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, Acorn and its friends will tell you that Mickey Mouse or any of those Cowboys never voted out of their state. But the problem with that is that while you're looking left at these things that they consider to be funny and amusing, what they're doing is going to the right with absentee ballots, provisional ballots, and other types of fraud. Voter registration and voter registration fraud and voter fraud, they're all together. When they say voter fraud doesn't exist, voter registration fraud is a part of voter fraud. So that's something that they don't consider. So if you're registered in one county and then you go over to another county and vote, or you register in multiple counties, that's still considered to be voter fraud. So while they're telling you that it's funny and Mickey Mouse is a joke, they're really just trying to distract you from the real issues. And this is basically what we just said, that while we're looking left, they move right. This is something they've been doing for years, and they are still doing. If you think that Acorn has disbanded, you're sadly mistaken. I worked simultaneously for Acorn and Project Vote. Project Vote is the voter registration arm that Obama worked for in the 90s. That group still exists. They're still in the same office at 739 8th Street Southeast in Washington, D.C., and they're still planning to run a massive voter registration drive in 2012 in hopes of keeping Obama in office. Nothing has changed. They've been violating their 501c3 nonprofit status for as long as they've existed, and they will continue to do it by illegally coordinating with campaigns and other groups. So just be aware that when they say that this is something that is not happening, Acorn has disbanded, it is not true.
Would you give me that address again, please?
739 8th Street Southeast. That is the office where Acorn formerly was. They have taken down the signs, and now they've come in through the alley in the back. So no one knows that they're still there. Washington, D.C., 2008.
Are they still getting money from the government, Acorn? They supposedly funded it. I'm sorry.
Recently, we just found out that the Obama administration had still given a grant to an Acorn affiliate, which is the Affordable Housing Centers of America. They try to say that they're separate, but I worked inside Acorn in political operations, in national operations, and none of those groups were separate. They all fed into the main Acorn head, as we called it, even Project Vote. So when Project Vote is eligible for grants from the Election Assistance Commission, they're eligible for other types of grants that could be, not only coming from the government, but also these are tax-exempt dollars that they're getting to run these partisan voter registration drives. That is the biggest problem out there, and people need to be aware of it, is that they're out there and they're taking money from these charitable organizations, and some of these charitable organizations are actually complicit. When you think about the Sandler Foundation, Herbert Marion Sandler out of California, Patricia Ballman of the Ballman Family Foundation out of Washington, D.C. These are some of the main donors. Open Society Institute, which is run by George Soros. These people are giving them money. So when ACORN was defunded, they laughed because government funds only account for about 3% of their budget. When I was at Project Vote, they were running a $28 million voter registration campaign for one election cycle, for 2007, 2008, one election cycle. ACORN's annual budget is up to $40 million. Not all of that is coming from the government. It's mostly from private foundations who are aware of what ACORN is doing, but they don't care because they're trying to influence the outcome of elections and also to change our society. So just be aware of that. So voter fraud, and this is what we've talked about before, the partisan debate on voter fraud. People will tell you all the time that voter fraud does not exist. How many of you guys have heard of the Brennan Center for Justice?
The what, please?
The Brennan Center for Justice. The Brennan Center has been around for decades. They have lawyers on staff, on call, that are pro bono, that are willing to file lawsuits across the country in conjunction with the ACLU, the NAACP, and of course Project Vote, and ACORN. They have done this in different states. Brennan. Now, if you're going to document, and this is something just to get back to, we're going to talk about the Brennan Center and their lawsuits a little bit later, and I'll give you some information as to where to go. If you go to the projectvote.org website, projectvote.org, you will go under litigation, and you can see all of the lawsuits that have been filed by Project Vote and the Brennan Center, including laws that have, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me come back to that. But the first step, if you're going to go out there and try to document voter fraud, is to make sure you know your laws. You should spend hours on your Secretary of State's website. Know your state laws, know the national laws, and be aware of what you can and cannot do when trying to document fraud. I tell this to people all the time, but the most important thing you can do is to be proactive, but also to be correct in what you're doing. When you're out there, you do not want to number one, get arrested for videotaping at polls or doing something you're not supposed to do. And number two, make the situation worse. So we need to be ahead of the game by knowing the laws and knowing what can be done. And of course, report, report, report. The reason why this is so important is because in California in 2010, there was a Democrat poll watcher, there was a Republican poll watcher. They were standing outside the polls, they saw a bus pull up full of people that appeared not to be legal citizens of this country. As they were coming off the bus, they were given little cards with their name and address on them, and this is who they were told, this is who you are, go vote. The Democrat took a video, the Republican took a video. They went down to the Board of Elections and turned those videos over. They made them sign on the spot a confidentiality agreement, and those videos disappeared and have never been seen from again. So it is very important to report. What they should have done is called one of the 1-800 numbers. The Democrats should have called their 1-800 number. The Republicans should have called their 1-800 number. They're numbers that are available to report fraud on election day. A copy of that video should have been kept, and there should have been call centers set up to where there are lawyers there that could advise them. That's what we did in Houston, Texas. We had, on election day, we had a center set up at the True the Vote office, where they were working out of Harris County, Texas, with a lawyer available, which was the DOJ whistleblower, J. Christian Adams. He's a great guy. He was there to answer any questions. They had someone there that could document any type of fraud that came in and report it in real time. And so this is very important because once that video was given away, it's gone. There's no proof. So even though there was a bipartisan effort to report fraud, someone at the Board of Elections didn't want that information to get out and made sure those videos disappeared.
That was in Harrison County, Texas.
Harris County, Texas is where we set up the polling place. Where that happened was San Diego, California. This is something I worked on with American Majority that you guys will see during the election year. We man this 24/7, which is why it's not active right now. But during the election year, you will be able to report fraud in real time with a voter fraud app that runs off of iPhone, BlackBerry, and Droid. I designed this with American Majority to be able to address the most common types of fraud and give you the ability to open up your camera on your phone automatically through the application, take pictures, and then click a button and send it to a center that will report it for you at the national level. And that's something, of course, you can look for in the Apple Store or wherever you buy your apps come 2012, because they will have it active again. The most common types of voter fraud are voter intimidation, absentee and provisional ballot fraud, and voter impersonation. When we think of voter intimidation, we're not talking about 60s, down in Alabama. We're talking about Pennsylvania Black Panthers standing out in front of the polls. That's the most recent type of voter intimidation you've seen. There have been accusations of voter intimidation that are not true, especially coming out of Texas by regular citizens that just tried to go out there and watch the polls. Because they had never seen conservatives in these communities in the past 3 or 4 decades, they screamed voter intimidation, 60s-style intimidation. None of it was true. And you know what happened by the end of that early voting period that started 2 weeks before the election? By election day, they were hugging those poll watchers, they were thanking them, and they were telling them to come back. Because it wasn't the people that were doing the complaining in the communities. It was the rabble-rousers and the people that had come in from the outside trying to prevent these groups from getting out there and putting poll watchers in these communities. One lady, she said that she didn't know she was doing it wrong because she'd been doing it like that for 20 years. And she thanked the lady for explaining to her how to do it. But when they came in, they saw people, I'm sorry?
They were complaining about the poll workers?
Yes, but it wasn't the community. It was some of the outside groups like Houston Votes, which is affiliated with Acorn and SEIU. They were the ones holding press conferences and saying they voter intimidation. One lady said that she didn't know that it was wrong for her to go into the booth with a person and show them how to vote straight down the line Democrat. And she was like, oh, come on, I'll show you. You got to just vote straight down the line. And she was doing it. And when they told her that she couldn't do that, she said, I never knew that. This is how they told me to do it. So they were training these people wrong and then counting on the no poll watchers being there to stop them from doing this. So by having poll watchers is very important because most of the time, and J. Christian Adams will tell you this too, there's not this big conspiracy theory to steal elections at the local level. Most people just don't know that they're not doing it correctly. They have honest intentions, but other people will prey on those intentions and use it for their advantage. Now, of course, there are some districts that are all one party that are, tend to, they're the only ones to count the votes, and they're the only ones that have access to the machines, and you have to watch out for those. Anytime that they don't want poll watchers or don't want people coming in from another party, then you know that something's up there. And this is just what we've been talking about, poll watchers and poll workers. Please know your laws, and this is another thing. There are some things that a poll watcher and a poll worker can do and can't do. And there's differences between a watcher and a worker, especially if you're on the outside. You can take video, you can talk to people within a certain feet of the polls. If you're inside, most states don't allow you to have cameras, to have contact with the voters. So just please know your laws. And if you're going to become a poll watcher or poll worker, there are classes you can take. Some of them are online at your Secretary of State's office. Other Secretary of States offer those classes once you sign up to work. Election protection and universal voter registration. This is where I really want to talk to you guys about what has been going on in our country. These laws that have been established have been able to weaken our electoral system, and it started, of course, back in the 90s with Motor Voter, the National Voter Registration Act. It was the first bill that Bill Clinton signed into law when he came to Washington. Now, it's no coincidence that Bill was from Arkansas. So it's Acorn. Acorn started in Arkansas in the 70s, around the same time that Clinton was coming up through the ranks. Why do you think he has such a goodwill in the black community? Acorn brought that. Black people love Bill Clinton. He came out of this feel-good Arkansas, and they came right to Washington with him. And Motor Voter was their reward. There's a video on YouTube, if you ever find it, from 1992 when he got the nomination. He's standing in Arkansas, and the first person he hugs when he walks off the stage is Zach Paulette, who was the executive director of Acorn Political Operations, the executive director of Project Vote, and the man who supervised Barack Obama in the 90s. That's the first person that Bill Clinton hugged when he walked up that stage, because Acorn got him that presidential nomination, and they carried him all the way to the White House. Don't be fooled by this. That's why Hillary Care was one of the big things they tried to pass in the 90s. And when it didn't come out, it became Obamacare when Obama got it. And this is something they've been trying for decades. And now the problem that I have with the National Voter Registration Act, not only are you allowed to do voter registration and driver's license in DMV places where some people who are not citizens are able to get licenses, but also in welfare offices. It's just like us being able to say, you know what, we should make a mandatory federal law that you have to have voter registration in gun stores and churches. That they're basically targeting their base by putting it in welfare offices and social services offices, because most of those people vote Democrat. It was never about voter disenfranchisement or making sure more minorities vote. They were targeting their base, and they were using the federal government to do it. That's the biggest joke of the National Voter Registration Act, is that we have a federal law that basically mandates that we must register Democrats. And they will sue any state that is not in compliance with that. The state of Texas just got sued for not having enough voter registration applications in welfare offices and food stamps offices, where of course there are a majority of people who are not citizens who are being offered these applications, because of course they are not allowed to ask if they're citizens of the United States. That's a very big problem.
However it's going to come about other than that motor voter. I had a personal incident, and I've worked in the polls. My daughter, she goes away to school in Pennsylvania, finishes 6 years of school. Now there's no provision in Ohio for her to come back and sign off the rolls.
To remove herself? You mean?
She can remove herself, but when she's back here, the offices are never open. So therefore, she could actually still vote. Of course, she's registered now in Pennsylvania, and she's voted in 2 or 3 elections as a Pennsylvania resident, which she is. But if she wanted to, she could vote twice in the presidential election.
That's true, and that's also a big problem with people that are married. There are women that are still registered under their maiden names, and that's the situation where one woman found out someone was using her maiden name to vote. But if she wanted to, she could vote under her maiden name and her married name.
I was going to say, now, in Pennsylvania, she just was married here recently. She could vote under her maiden name there once. She could vote under her married name once, drive to Ohio and vote again, and she could cast 3 ballots.
That's where the Help America Vote Act comes in. This is exactly what we're talking about here. The Help America Vote Act of 2002 was passed in response to the 2000 elections, and it was also a way to get money to the states when they needed it. Each state had to come up with a plan as to how they were going to clean their voter registration rolls and make them traceable to one system, whether it be driver's license or social security numbers. And so the states, based on this plan, were given money by the federal government. How many states are in compliance? 0.
Oh, wow.
So what people don't understand is that you can sue under not only under the Help America Vote Act, but also Section 8 of the National Voter Registration Act. Section 8 is the right of private action. You can sue your Secretary of State and make them remove these people from the rolls. It takes 20 days though. You have to send them a notice. Just 1 second. They send them a notice. Then they have 20 days to clean up those rolls and respond. If not, you can file a lawsuit. And that's what people don't realize. Under HAVA, you can say that they are not in compliance with HAVA, which is a federal law, and they have a certain amount of time to get in compliance. If not, you will file a lawsuit. And this is perfect if you're working with your state attorney general. If not, you have to do it as a citizen-led initiative. Yes?
I had an experience for the first time last year at a local precinct where I was outside the poll, and I really didn't feel competent going in, but I was asked to try to do this with petitions outside, far enough away, and there was a couple that pulled up, and they were going in, and I guess they were asking me as maybe someone that I would know would answer, they had a utility bill that they were going to go in there for a provisional. Now, to me, I would say, why a utility bill when they could have, their ID or anything else? And I asked them when they came out, well, how'd that work out for you? Well, they were able to cast that vote.
Yeah, that's another problem. That's the biggest problem with the Help America Vote Act, and that's where you could see the bipartisanship of it. Because while it included a provision for list maintenance, it also included a provision for provisional voting. Provisional voting means if I come into your precinct and I say, I belong here, and I'm adamant about it, and even though you can prove that I'm probably from another precinct, I can cast a provisional ballot in your precinct, which will be counted up to 7 days after the election. But in a close,
That's not true.
I'm sorry,
That's not true in Ohio.
it's not true in Ohio?
No, because I worked the polls and I had a person do that to me. I said, yes, you can vote. They voted and I said, we will contact you within 10 days. You have to prove where you are. They sent a deputy sheriff to that person's house. He wasn't there. A warrant was issued for that woman's arrest. She was arrested for voter fraud.
Because in most states,
She
they do
can't
have
vote. You have to let her vote provisional, sign everything. And we put it in the ballot. Okay, but they're checked.
Yeah.
They all have to be checked within 10 days and they are not counted.
In some states, they are,
In
unfortunately.
Ohio, they are set aside until they are proven
Yeah.
they live there.
Yeah, they're supposed to
And
be
that was the first
verified
one we got.
before they're added to the rolls. You're right.
Yeah.
He's completely right. That's how it's supposed to work. In most states, provisional ballots, though, is an open door to fraud. We have seen this in California, we've seen it in Pennsylvania, we've seen it in Maryland, where the provisional ballots, especially in very close elections, this is exactly what happened. Norm Coleman came and spoke at the True to Vote Summit in Houston, Texas in March, and he told how those provisional ballots were opened. They were copied, and they're supposed to be, once they're copied, they're supposed to be stamped duplicate or a copy or something. They were not stamped anything, and so those provisional ballots were actually counted twice in Franken's favor. So provisional ballots can be used if you're not on top of your game, and if their state is not willing to verify that these people are eligible, they can be used in close elections. So that's what we have to be careful with. But they are supposed to be verified before they're counted. That's why it's up to 7 to 10 days after the election before they are added.
Voter
Yeah.
photo ID
Yes.
Act right now. What is your opinion on that? Do you feel like that if something like that were applied, that we would be able to clear up a lot of this voter fraud?
Yes, I'm pushing for a photo ID. I think there are over 15 states that have it on the ballot. And the problem right now is that I just got an email notice this morning that Project Vote and a couple of states, U.S. senators, have asked for the DOJ to investigate this photo ID as possible violations of the Civil Rights Act of 1965.
Well, they're trying to call it a poll tax. Well, I'm sorry, but if I have to put gas in my car to drive to the poll, is that, I mean, you do have to spend a little bit of money sometimes to
And in some states, they're giving them, for free to people that are low income and can't afford them, but it doesn't make any sense. I have to show ID to return a $25 dress, let alone, it makes no sense. So we really do need real, and I'm talking about photo ID, not a utility bill, not someone vouching for you, a picture ID from the state issue. So this is something that a lot of states are doing right now, and I'm telling people that what we should do is turn the tables on them. When we see these things that are happening that are weakening our electoral system, we should sue under the Civil Rights Act of 1965, because that is the true disenfranchisement of people when the votes are diluted and they're stolen from people that have died for the right to vote. So we, as conservatives, and it's just something we've talked about with the married woman, and I'm just speeding through this because I want to get to the GOTV part. And one thing I do want to mention is universal voter registration. Chuck Schumer out of New York has been pushing for universal voter registration for years. This means that they would pull all the DMV records, all the property records, all the welfare rolls, and just register everybody. So no one would have to do anything. But the problem with that is, of course, people own property in New York and Florida and other states. People that have driver's licenses are not necessarily citizens. People that are on the welfare rolls are not necessarily citizens. And they could be on multiple rolls. There is a big problem with universal voter registration. It will open the door to massive fraud. And anytime this comes up, we need to be aware of it and get there and make sure that we are calling our senators and our congressmen and letting them know we're not going to stand for this, because they're going to try it again. It keeps getting beat down, but eventually they're going to try to get it passed. and this is just what we were talking about with the property records. But our elections are so important. Free and fair elections are what, this country was built on. If we allow people to weaken our electoral system, we might as well stay at home and not vote. So we have to get out there and let people know that we're serious about this. We're serious about voter ID, and we're serious about strengthening the laws. Unfortunately, the laws of the past 20 years have actually weakened the system. So we've got to not only introduce new legislation, but also work on with the existing laws to get excited, to use the provisions that work for us. Part of that being the list maintenance with HAVA and the right of private action with the National Voter Registration Act. If citizens started suing the Secretary of States across the country, you think those voter rolls wouldn't be cleaned up immediately? Yes, because they don't have the money to fight the lawsuits. That's why Project Vote and ACORN have been so successful in filing these lawsuits, because they will settle and issue consent agreements instead of going to court. It's just like the one that was issued in Harris County, Texas. They were sued, and instead of going to a court, the local board of elections agreed to take all of the voter registration applications that came in, even if they were questionable, until 2012. So the Harris County, Texas, which has 1/3 of the population of the whole state of Texas, is under consent agreement until 2012 because of a lawsuit that they wouldn't fight, that they settled with the Democrats. So we have to be aware of how they're using this against us. And once again, if we just don't do anything, we are basically giving away our system to people that have nefarious intentions. But I am working, and that's what we're going to talk about in just a second. What we can do as people. So, and when I wrote this, it was 7 states, now it's up to 15. Your question, sir?
The other real problem, and I know here in Ohio, if you took a vote of all the different counties we're from, every county act operates somewhat differently, even though they have the same set of rules. And I can guarantee you, the counties in northern Ohio operate much different than the counties in southern Ohio. I would bet my paycheck, well, I don't get paid anymore. I would almost bet on that from my experience of working in every county in the state of Ohio during my employment.
And that's one of the problems, that there's not uniform laws between the different counties and precincts. And this, once again, this is how you spell Brennan Center. It's right there. The Brennan Center for Justice, Project Vote, ACLU. These are your usual suspects in these lawsuits we just talked about. And just to get back to your question, what we're going to have to do is to get people in different precincts across the country that are working together. If you have not heard of True the Vote, go to truethevote.org. They will train you. We're trying to put 1 million poll watchers at the polls across the country. Everyone being trained the same way to go out there and make sure that our electoral system is safe. So they're willing to come out to your city and train you. Once you're trained, you go out and you train the people in the next county. It's run by, and they train the King Street Patriots. True the Vote. They have passed, and I didn't bring it with me, but they have passed numerous legislations just by going to the State House and fighting. They stayed in Austin, Texas, I don't know how many times when the legislators were in session. This is what we have to do. When Michelle Obama said we weren't going to be able to go back to our normal lives, her husband wasn't going to let us, that is so true. We can't go back to letting the government, thinking that they're going to, how do I put it, to do what they're supposed to do. That they're going to do what's right. They've already proven that they can't handle it. And we as people, if we're going to keep this republic, we've got to fight for it. Right. So that means constantly fighting for it. And we're going to skip the voter registration part because I want to talk a little bit about the new initiatives. And I can tell you a little, and this will come up in what we're doing. And I want to thank American Majority for giving me the chance to put this together, because this is really where we're going with this. Where we're going is action. We need a plan. And that's what the next section is going to talk about. Not only voter registration, but what the plan is.
We have to hire a lawyer and spend money to do that as individuals. Is that right? I mean, I don't know how to go about that.
Unfortunately, it can cost upwards of $10,000 to do that. One of the things that we are trying, to do is to get something on the right that can act like the Brennan Center for Justice, to where they will offer pro bono.
We have that in Ohio. We have the 1851 Center for Constitutional Law.
1851 Center for Constitutional Law.
And they were the ones who actually sued ACORN in the state of Ohio. And
they
signed it. Well, it was the Black Eye Institute takes credit for it, but they're friends with Maurice. Maurice's group at the 1851 Center. 1851 was the year they passed the state constitution. So they run a good pro bono organization.
Okay, thank you.
So this tells you a little bit about the site and what we're looking to do. Provide you with education, resources, training, connections, and all the tools that you will need to win on the local level without taking away from your group. Your group still has complete control over everything. We're just providing you with resources. And all of these resources are what you will need to get out there and take back your city from Obama and some of the other crazy groups. Because think about it. When they're trying to teach sex ed to 4-year-olds, it may be time to get a new person on your school board. So we want everything from school board to dog catcher. We're going to take it back from the local level up. And that's why this is so important. Recipe for winning. How many of you guys have read the blueprint? If you haven't read the blueprint, please read the blueprint. This is how they took Colorado and turned it from a red state to a blue state. It is exactly, I remember writing the political plan for Colorado and Maryland in 2006. And you know what happened in 2006? The Democrats took the House and set the stage for 2008. They let the economy crash, they knew about it. I was at Acorn and we have documents that are in my possession that haven't been doctored, that are still from 2006 that say, we saw the first bubbles of the housing, the first cracks in the housing bubble, and we're going to be right there when it cracks. Because they knew that was going to be their opportunity for them to come right in. So they went from giving away bad mortgages and loans to doing foreclosures. And all of this was because they knew that once the housing, what I'm trying to say? Yeah, once the bubble burst, the economy was going to collapse, and Obama was going to use it to blame Bush and slide right into office. Exactly.
Sorry, time's up.
So these are some things. I got some information in the back on Sanity 2012. We want you groups to get involved, and even if you don't set up with Sanity 2012, just realize that the resources and the things that you can do come with organizing your communities and getting out there and being visible in places where you haven't been visible before. Thank you.
Thank you.